The next transformation story is actually about something that is used in many different kinds of apps. I'm talking about material design from Google, sort of the original open source design system. Recently, the team there has been rethinking some fundamental assumptions about material, what it should be. And they have some startling conclusions about the way that design systems are designed and maybe should be designed, and some reflections about their own process. Please join me in welcoming Christian and Matias to the stage.
Hello, hello. Good to be here. Excited to be at Config. Excited to get our slides up. I don't know. Let's see. Are they coming? There we go. I'm Matias Duarte.
I'm Christian Robertson. I lead UX for material design at Google.
Yeah, and it's exciting to be here. Exciting to see all the creative and amazing stuff that shows up at Config here. So, apparently, we just crossed our 10-year anniversary of material design. Who remembers that initial release of material design here? Yeah. It's hard for me to believe it's been 10 years, but I remember it vividly. And, you know, that first material focused on motion. It focused on color, bold color. It focused on really clarifying visual hierarchy. And it featured our poster child, the floating action button. And everybody loves the fab. Our goal was to unify design across Google, unify design across the web and mobile, give Google's designers tools that they needed to focus on the unique parts of their product. And looking back, Material did a little bit more than that. I'm very proud of the work that we all did in delivering these resources to help so many different teams and so many different makers, get a leg up. I'm also really proud of how we helped start this conversation around common patterns and design systems. Now, 10 years later, we're still building on that original foundation. And our goals are basically the same, although we've had to make a few course corrections along the way. In 2018, we introduced Material 2, and with that, Material Theming. And at that point, the idea was to have, like this single parameter that you could control things like the corner radius or the stroke style, even shadows, or whether you have any elevation at all, and have it cascade across that entire component system. The goal there was to make it easy to have more diversity in the designs, to encourage more creativity, more variety. And that was just the beginning, because 3 years later, we released Material 3, where we expanded that same idea, that same ambition, to include our users with dynamic color that was based on the user's wallpapers or their direct choices. And we wanted to create a much more intimate connection between the people and the products that they use, something that they could identify with, something that could be an extension of their uniqueness, to really invite them to be co-creators with us. And in this moment of Gen AI and Gen UI, that invitation is something I'm personally excited to push even further. But getting to Material 3 was a big turning point for us. It was a real critical point for us. Because it turns out that over the years, over these 10 years, there's been a few mantras that we believed in as designers, and we could not have gotten to Material 3 if we had clung to them, if we hadn't examined them. Our mantra with Material 1 was really to remove everything superfluous. And yet, we ended up finding that this kind of modernist ideal was sometimes ending up with designs that were boring, rigid, and dull, because it was too easy to confuse what was delightfully simple and focused with kind of a stark minimum required for the viable product. So we ended up asking ourselves, what if it's not just about the functionality and the business objective behind it, but what if it actually matters how people feel during the process of using it? So we tried this new mantra, form follows feeling, and we looked for ways to move past that kind of rigid minimalism, to bring life and energy back into our products through shape and color and scale. We fought back against the backlash against decoration. We decided that maybe pretty shouldn't be a 4-letter word. And we wanted to let the users see their choices reflected back at them, not just because it helps drive a connection to the product, but because ultimately the design is really for them, not for us. Discussing the colors, we were constantly talking about material blue, our default color. And one day somebody said, material blue, how about material U? And that's how that name stuck. And we've been recently pushing on this idea by creating a spectrum of designs and actually doing real research against them with increasing levels of expressiveness. And we've been searching for this limit. Is there a limit to expressiveness by pushing too far? I think some of you all here might know that I always say, push the design to 11, we can always dial it back. But to our surprise, as we're doing this research, when we thought we were pushing it too far, those are the directions that are most well-liked. And this is true across countries and demographics. And it's a reminder that in a business environment, we often anchor on the things that are the easiest to measure, like usability. But it's important to explore the things that are also harder to understand or quantify, because it could turn out that things like feelings are maybe the most impactful levers. Turns out that paying attention to how people feel leads to deeper truths. And we're continuing to look for ways to move beyond the mundane and the easily observable to bring new experiences to life. And so we're continuing to challenge ourselves. How do we design a practice that allows a focus on more than just functionality, that allows form to follow feeling?
So there's a design dogma that we should always start from a really comprehensive brief. And as we were making Material 3, we realized that maybe the more important thing was just to start. And that crucially, drawing and designing directly is an important part of understanding, and therefore offering a brief that makes sense. So here's some early images from work on Material 3, and we made decks that were thousands of slides long in the process. And it sounds like it would be slower to do it that way, but what we found is that by not being precious, pushing the team to generate more helped us to move further faster. We didn't get stuck in the definition phase where we were able to react to real artifacts, even as we were discovering what the story was. In the first working session we did for Material 3, the only prompt we gave designers was an empty slide deck that we started to fill up. And another pitfall is to restrict ourselves to things that work tactically, limiting ourselves to paint inside that shape only, because why would you? Why would you explore outside of what you know could work tactically? But really, we're not just trying to find something that works. We're trying to find the intersection of something that works and whatever is new and exciting. And that overlap can be really small. So drawing a lot and drawing outside that boundary of what works helps us to quickly home in on things that that can work without us getting stuck. And often we think of the design process as this kind of linear march where you set a goal and then you incrementally make small steps. We know that searching for the great idea doesn't always move in a straight line. I remember when we were working on Material 1, we really had it dialed in. We had the typography nailed. We had everything aligning to a baseline grid, which made me so happy. We had the color story, all of the color roles. It was functioning really well, but we knew it needed something. And we didn't know what it was, but it needed something to define it, some element to help focus attention on the screen. The problem with trying to find it, though, is that you never know. Some projects, it happens on the very first day. Sometimes it happens like the last moment before your deadline. We've all been there. I still remember the first time that I saw the floating action button. It was a drawing made by one of our designers, Allison Tong. I remember where it was on the wall. I remember where I was standing in the room, and I pointed to it. I said, "That's it. Like, that's what we've been looking for." It solved our problem. I knew it was going to be like an iconic part of the story. And it shows that just sometimes you can only really define the problem after you've started exploring. The next thing we learned was that even though everyone says don't design by committees, well, first, it's kind of impossible at Google because we're super consensus driven. So there's a lot of committees. But what we found is that designing by committees is a really powerful thing, or it can be. And part of it is that new tools make it possible, just like Git enabled worldwide collaboration on code, or wikis for information. Figma really has opened up real-time collaboration between a lot of people at the same time. And in fact, there were times during the creation of Material 3, just because we were coordinating across so many teams, that we had workshops where hundreds of designers had contributed. And there's a lot of techniques and tactics we've developed over the years to help drive this consensus. But one of the keys is fighting against ownership. Like, we really want ownership to be shared. That makes me think of when I sat on the hiring committee for many years at Google, and every once in a while you'd see a whole bunch of portfolios come in with the exact same project. And there was one in particular, and I won't say what it was, but I remember just being really cynical because yet another, and it was just the same images. And I realized, though, looking at it, that every one of the best projects that I had ever worked on had that same characteristic, where it really would be hard to create separate portfolios for the different people who worked on a project, where everyone feels such a shared ownership of the thing that got created that everyone's portfolio would be the same. And it felt like that working on Material 3, and in fact, some of the previous editions as well. Not everything we do has hundreds of designers working on it. And of course, the collaborators go far beyond just designers. I remember early on in the Material 3 process, we had a bunch of writers working in our sketching sessions where instead of mood boards, they were actually writing poetry, trying to kind of stay in that kind of dream state that you are in that early generative process. And like after they would read their things aloud, the room just went quiet. It was very powerful. And it really helped us to understand the ideas we were working with. And I never considered that writing poetry could lead to efficiencies in corporate processes, but there it was. So we've been talking about how generation is really important to this, and generation is something that parallelizes really well. You can have a lot of people drawing together, but in order to reduce it, we found that it does help to have smaller groups work on the synthesis. And this is true at the project level as well as at the leadership level, where while you're doing that synthesis, you have to be careful to make sure that the synthesis resonates with all the people that participated, so it does feel like a shared effort. But one of the ways that this plays out for the material team is that we often take an editorial view as we share work from different teams. So this has been a really great way to scale the rollout of material internally inside Google, because there's great work happening all around the company, and sharing it between teams is a really good way to build consensus, and it makes everyone feel great who's been doing the work, and everyone is inspired to see work from their peers. So the committee for design can really scale to whole companies and really to whole ecosystems. We're working from the same zeitgeist, whether we know it or not. So when we're talking about design systems, the common wisdom for design systems is that it's there to promote consistency. And this was a really big part of the conversation in Material 1. We understood that shared patterns make things easier for both users and makers. And we kind of assumed that the variety would come from different products and individual makers, not the design system. But what we found is that in some ways, the patterns became too consistent. And we were actually surprised at just how hungry people were for those common patterns. But in filling that gap, it started to seem like there was maybe too much similarity in the ecosystem, and there wasn't enough differentiation between products, even from different companies. So this was the precipitating thinking behind Material 2, which was focused on creating flexibility and prompting the ecosystem for more flexibility. And there really was an explosion of new ideas that came out of this, which made us really happy. We've been doing more to create flexibility, like RobotoFlex, which builds more possibilities into the operating system. But of course, we want to enable people to use custom fonts through the Google Fonts library and custom typography. But for M3, we realized that a design system is not just helpful for diversity between products, but also in service of individual user personalization. And not just that, but that it would be impossible to design all the permutations needed to give every user what they wanted. It actually needs to be built into the system. It would be impossible to deliver all the personal variety without a robust system supporting it. So we started with color because it makes sense. Everybody has a favorite color. We've done research. Well, there's a lot of jokes about doing research on blue at Google. But it turns out like every tech company has done research on blue and it always wins. But it's not the whole story. I remember one particular study where we found about half the people preferred blue for this. It was a very specific case. Blue was maybe double what the next most popular color was. But when we added up all of the not blue colors, it turns out that not blue was as popular as blue. And if all we did was blue, we were leaving half of the audience out. More than just people's favorite color. We want to allow for different types of contrast, for example, to support users with different visual and cognitive abilities, where this may be the difference between a product that people can use and one that they can't. And once we move past color, it's just the beginning for all the different ways that a design system can give different users exactly what they need. And once you start to see the world, not just about consistency, but about consistency and variety, the possibilities are endless.
So the takeaway from all this is that we can do so much better than just delivering the minimum functionality, and we can do better than focusing on only the most observable of metrics. We can, and I believe we need to recognize that people like the things they like, not just the things that work for them. They like things that appeal to them emotionally, that vibe with them. And yeah, that's a business opportunity to tap into, but it's also a fundamental part of what makes us human. So we need to do the work in our organizations to make this type of thing possible. We need to make the space for our people to have that exploration time. We need to prepare for and protect against the gauntlet of no that comes for every interesting and exciting idea. We need to give people on our teams the space and the permission to do what they want to do most of all. I mean, who among us doesn't crave to be making things that have that emotional resonance? Ultimately, it is on us, the people in this room, to question the mantras that we've been given, to follow our feelings, and to keep making things interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you.